Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this prestigious Pakistan International Psychiatric Conference. Thank you, Afzal, for the kind invitation, and to the team that put together this exciting conference together. This conference is happening at a critical time in our global psychiatric movement. And my intention in my presentation is to feature what is happening in the global arena, not just with COVID, but try and position psychiatry within the basic geopolitical changes that's happening at the moment. The world is undergoing many, many changes. And the idea of creating a geopolitical sphere of psychiatry is so important at this particular time. I will give you a basic overview, put forward some global evidence, and then make a strong case on why psychiatry should be moving into the geopolitical arena. Let me talk a bit about population growth and what's happening around the world at the moment. At the turn of the 18th century, we had 1 billion people in the world. We're gradually increasing now, and is expected to be 11 billion plus by the end of the century. 13 countries exceeds 100 million people, in which Pakistan is one of those countries with 215 million people. Egypt in 2019 was the latest country to join that group of 13 countries. Fertility rate or birth rate is changing across the world. But between the period of 2017 and 2050, there will possibly be only 5 countries in the world in which overall fertility will be on the increase. Every other country will be on the decline. The 5 countries on the increase will be India, Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Pakistan, and the USA. The USA will begin to fall away. Overall fertility rate will decline, and that will be more so in Europe and in Latin America. Life expectancy is increasing in Europe at pace. However, fertility rate is decreasing at pace. Putting psychiatry into foreign policy, I think the evidence suggests that's the direction we should be looking at. Geopolitics is changing rapidly. The world is moving from a phase of relative stability to one of great unsettling times. There's great social and personal instability. And overall, there seems to be a vacuum in power and politics. And over the last 5 to 10 years, we have seen a global loss in faith in leadership, whether it be from the previous administration in America, to what's happening across in Venezuela and Brazil, right across to the Arab states, to Turkey, parts of Europe that has become very right-wing, and indeed what's happening in India. 3.3 billion people in the world currently live under autocratic regime, while 4.2 billion live in what they might describe as democracies. That is the 17th consecutive year that there has been a decline in democracies in the world. And I mentioned a few countries where the decline is. I think more and more countries are becoming autocratic, and we see it across Europe. I'm from the UK. We're seeing it in the UK with Brexit, and again with nationalism and the xenophobia that's being driven across. Legislation has been put into place that is restricting freedom of movements, restricting freedoms of the press. Those regimes are becoming autocratic. Hungary being a primary country in Europe. Now, throughout the years, psychiatry has created various specialities and genres. Social psychiatry, very relevant, and their conference is coming up later in the year. Cultural psychiatry. I'm on the board of the World Association of Cultural Psychiatry. and we have taken a cultural view of psychiatry, biological psychiatry, neuropsychiatry. I think the time has come now that we all within psychiatry to look at geopsychiatry, particularly what's happening in the world with COVID and how vaccines are being distributed and how the geopolitics is being played out. Geopolitical psychiatry, or as we call it, geopsychiatry, focuses on the influence of geopolitical factors such as globalization, foreign policy, human rights violations, violence, climate change, man-made public health crisis and natural disasters, earthquakes, Ebola, Zika, SARS, COVID, transnational migration, and all of those, the impact on mental health and mental illness. In other words, we're moving from the social determinants of health that impacts in psychiatry to much more geopolitical determinants of health. A third of the world population is currently exposed to climatic condition that produces deadly heat wave. And currently we can see the heat wave that is running across America and Canada. And as I speak, there's massive floods across Europe. People living in low and lower middle income countries are 5 times more likely than those in higher income countries to be displaced by extreme weather. There are many countries in the world, in particular in the Caribbean and around Latin America, where those countries exist below sea level in their natural form. So sea rises and the water level rises. Those countries become even more exposed to crop failure, exposed to all sorts of economic and agricultural damage that's creating the indelible scar of mental health. By 2100, it is, by the end of the century, it is estimated that 2 billion people may become climate refugees arising from rising seas. Since the mid-20th century, the current climate warming trend is of particular significance because of human activity and the current proceeding rate. We're glad to see that more countries have now rejoined the panel for climate change. And I hope that psychiatry is well represented at the climate change conference in Glasgow. Certainly we will be there. We'll be making our case for psychiatry, and we'll be making a case for the impact of climate change on psychiatry across the world. But briefly look at life expectancy. 50 years ago, life expectancy in Africa was about 36 years. It's now increased to 66 years, 6.6 year increase since 2000. Child mortality rate is dropping. The complexities of forced displacement that's happening across many parts of the world, whether it's been Venezuela, whether what's happening with the Myanmar and crossing over into Bangladesh, what might happen with Afghanistan situation at the moment, what's happening with the migrant crisis in Europe, what is drifting towards the United States and elsewhere. We currently have 68.5 million people displaced, forcibly displaced within their country or outside of their country, an increase of nearly 3 million from 2016. It's actually the size of the population of the United Kingdom or France. That is how large it is. However, 70% of the total displaced population are in middle and low income countries and not in high income countries, as the Western media would like you to believe. And Pakistan is one of the 5 countries that host the majority of displaced people. Well, look at the geopolitics of mental health. 450 million people around the world facing mental health challenges. It's disproportionate, distributed around amongst low and middle income countries. 30% of the world disease burden accounts for mental health problems. Depression will become number one condition in about 10 to 15 years' time, replacing dysentery and other physical illnesses. It affects 10% of the people at any one time. As I repeat, war, conflict, climate change, and public health crisis is adding to the invisible and crippling mental health scars. and impact many lives, create large numbers of refugees, asylum seekers, and internally displaced people. Psychiatry, we have to stand up to this challenge, whether within our own country or across the globe. We are a global organization within psychiatry, and even within the organizations like the WPA or the World Association of Cultural Psychiatry. We have to stand up together. Let me highlight your study, particularly it was done by Bugra, myself, and others on the British Commonwealth. Pakistan is part of the Commonwealth. And we looked at legislation in the Commonwealth countries, because sometimes we talk about services and we talk about outcomes and research and studies. But what we found that there are many countries who were previously part of the Commonwealth, 54 countries part of the Commonwealth, still use outdated British legislation. 30% of mental health policies are more than 10 years old. Laws and amendments continue to give powers to recover costs for mental health. See that in Cyprus. 48 Commonwealth countries have a mental health policy. Low-income countries were less likely to have a mental health policy compared to high-income countries. That is because low-income countries are faced with other issues like climate change, like conflict, like poverty, and gross inequalities. And added to that, availability of COVID vaccines. The priority for mental health is slipping down. We have to help those countries get it back in the priority areas and help those working in those areas, our colleagues, to improve the situation in their environment. I will talk a bit about global mental health in a minute, but I'll make the case of how geopsychiatry can oversee global mental health. In our work in developing geopsychiatry, we had to create evidence to support what we were saying. We created something called the CAPE Vulnerability Index. We looked at 9 global indicators: Gini, DALYs, life expectancy, conflict, migration, resources, and we ranked the countries. And what you have here is the first edition that we published in 2018. At the end of this year, the second edition will be published because we'll include the COVID data. Well, what this slide shows in red, there are 25 countries, mainly in Africa, but you can see parts of Syria and Iraq as well, and Afghanistan, which borders on Pakistan. There are countries we now describe as fragile states. In the old days, we would call them failed states, but they are fragile states. Because on the CAPE Vulnerability Index, in every one of the 9 indicators, these countries come more than once, sometimes 8 or 9 times, in the bottom 20 of these index. And we're looking at scores of 194 countries in this index. These countries feature in the bottom 20. So these are fragile countries. These are countries now ravaged by conflict, ravaged by war, had Ebola. Now they have COVID. That's the red bit. Those are the critical countries. The orange part are those countries that sit just outside of that. And there is about 24 of those countries. Pakistan is on the list, but they're not near the red list. They're far removed from that. I will show you that in a minute. But places like Ukraine, that's been under pressure from Russia, Kazakhstan, China. In the new index, India is on this list because of the large mortality and case rates associated with COVID. Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, we all see what's happening at the moment. But even in this index, the data we use, 2015, 2016, shows that these were vulnerable countries. We used the data of 2015, 2016, published in 2018, because of the 9 indicators, we could only find consistency in 2015, 2016, because not all the data fields are reporting at the same time. And that's the issue with it. So this data goes beyond the data that's used to measure social determinants of health. Indeed, the countries we've identified here has gained some interest with the World Bank and the IMF, and indeed with Gavi, because they use a different scoring system to identify vulnerable countries, low-income countries, middle-income countries. If you can see the slide briefly, Venezuela, Gambia, Libya, Swaziland, Egypt, Mali, Turkmenistan, Pakistan. Pakistan is in the lower ranks. However, in the new indicator, there's a slight improvement in the Pakistan scores, maybe because of some economic gains that has pushed the Gini index up a bit. But if you have a close look, there's a lot of countries in Asia, a lot of countries, more countries in Africa, and the countries you can see out in like Papua New Guinea and parts of Belize and Antigua and Barbuda. These are countries being affected by climate change. Barbuda suffered a horrendous storm that has destroyed the country. So there's a mixture of conflict, climate changes, but the mental health needs in this area, psychiatry present in this area has diminished, and we need to put it back there. Just a slide at the time I'm doing my presentation to show South Asia COVID tracker. You see Afghanistan and below that Pakistan reporting just over 22,500 deaths with nearly 1 million cases reported. Maldives, India with 411,000 deaths. The mortality figure, like the case figure, various countries may be counting it differently. It's a bit like suicide. Countries are counting it differently, but we have to go with what we are given, work with it, and work with our colleagues on the ground. Geopolitics and mental health. I want to look at the costs now. For mental health problems, it costs the world $2.3 trillion per year. That's the economic cost. By 2030, the cost is likely to increase US to 16.1 trillion. That will increase further with COVID and the mental health scars COVID is bringing with it. The economic cost is horrendous, but the economics in psychiatry doesn't always seem to balance. We live in a world where the economics in coronary heart disease is much more easy to rationalize, or indeed cancers and strokes and conditions like that. But the economic costs in psychiatry and people with mental illness is astronomical. Yet only 2% of the total health spending is spent on investing, treating of mental illness. Low and middle income countries. Global spend on health is expected to increase to 18.28 trillion worldwide by 2040. 1% is spent on preventing non-communicable disease in low income countries. Even though those low non-communicable disease is responsible for 6 to 7% of the deaths in low income countries. Currently, 80% of global aid is spent on humanitarian crisis, victims of violence, conflict, whether it's Myanmar, Yemen, or wherever. 10 years ago, we were spending 80% on victims of natural disaster. Earthquakes being the most predominant one. Aid donations, United States is still the biggest aid donor, 35.5 billion. In the United Kingdom, we've had a big debate of whether we want to reduce our overseas aid from 0.7% of GDP to 0.5%. Unfortunately, 2 days ago, the Houses of Parliament approved that reduction. That is very sad because that reduction in overseas aid by the UK government will cost lives in many parts of the world. And we're totally opposed to that reduction. And we will fight for that aid to be returned. It's not just on mental health that money will go to, but in terms of vaccinations, the food aid program, and various other programs. You know, one politician say children will die, and we can't stand back to see that happen. And for those of you who know me, we will continue to fight for that. Germany is the second biggest aid donor, followed by UK, Japan, and France. From the United Kingdom point of view, 5 countries have direct bilateral agreements and they are Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and Nigeria, with almost all the money going to countries in Africa and Asia. United Kingdom tend to give this money out to Africa and Asia, very little so to Latin America, basically because United Kingdom never had colonies in Latin America. Most of the Commonwealth sits in Africa and Asia. So in a way, they contributed that. They don't give enough, and we will continue to fight to give that. So geopsychiatry is a foreign policy goal. What we've done with the vulnerability index, the Cape Vulnerability Index, we identified the most vulnerable communities to be targeted. And we believe the red countries and the orange countries that I showed you earlier should be countries where aid should be prioritized. Indeed, that is where the COVID vaccine should be prioritized. Because our Cape Vulnerability Index is the most up-to-date rationalization of countries in need. We believe that the Cape should be used for that. Global mental health should be prioritized in that area. Geopsychiatry should be a priority in that area. Why we continue to target areas that doesn't need that amount of help, it's a political reason, but we need to do that. To support our Cape Vulnerability Index, we obviously had to look, how do we move beyond social determinants of health? Social determinants of health, of employment and inequalities, housing, and the various sorts of things that Professor Michael Marmot has developed over the years. We've developed something called the Geopolitical Determinants of Health. There's 2 papers we've published in that. And geopolitical determinants of health now encompasses today's world geopolitical situations. Conflict, migration, climate change, COVID, and everything else that goes with it. Inequalities, poverty, that. We believe that if we use the geopolitical determinants of health, alongside the Cape, identifying the country, we could move much stronger with our geopsychiatry movement. We think foreign policy should have psychiatry as one of its greatest pillars. And countries receiving aid and giving aid should see psychiatry, mental health, as one of the pillars of rebuilding society and moving forward. To look at improvement in health, mental health. It also gives better economic and environmental and educational benefits. It can also lead to fewer conflicts and a better response to natural and public health crisis. Because there's one thing that COVID has shown us. It showed the global north that they were not prepared for COVID. They were ill prepared. Other parts of the world, Asia, and parts of Africa, Asia with SARS, and Africa with Ebola, they were better prepared. Parts of the Caribbean were better prepared because they have been accustomed to things around hurricanes and floodings. But the global north was ill prepared because they basically thought it was a flu virus that was coming and they could cope with it. And Europe, like America, has suffered the consequences. So by putting psychiatry, putting mental health into foreign policy and rebuilding a country post-COVID, we could have the educational and better response to natural and public health crisis. Because I don't believe COVID will be the last virus, the last pandemic that will afflict this world. And we have to be prepared. I think Pakistan's psychiatry is at the forefront with your global leadership. And I know some of you, and we've been in dialogue, and we've written chapters together, we've, collaborating on various fronts. We want to build that collaboration ourselves here in the UK and with the world. I want to link up Pakistan with people in the Caribbean, the large Indo-Asian, Indo-Caribbean community there, who originated from India around the 1830s. Some of you may know Caribbean West Indies psychiatry. Pakistan psychiatry has the leadership. You have the policy forum, and you're building a reservoir of technological intelligence to move forward. I've seen some of the work you're doing. You can lead a region, and what you do should be shared around the world. Don't rely on the global north to be giving you the global mental health agenda. For geopsychiatry, we're asking you to embrace it, to understand it, come on board with it. Create local and national branches, sections of geopsychiatry, just the same as we created local branches of social psychiatry and cultural psychiatry, integrated it into geopsychiatry, thereby pushing forward the awareness and knowledge and building the new workforce, building the new intelligence across medicine, across nursing, across social work, and within the NGO sector. Build a research platform, national thematic events, seminars, conferences, master classes. We are here to support you and help you with that. We like to do that. But at the same time, don't rely always on the global mental health arena, because sometimes that can be a crusade. And people often say to me, the global north is telling us how to do psychiatry, how to run our health service, how to run our psychiatric service. And my response is, no one knows better to run your service, develop your training program, develop your research than you do. You know, health is a sovereign issue. And people must be proud of their sovereignty to develop their own health strategy and their own programs. Just a word of caution of the global north, because I hear a lot from the UK. They're doing global mental health in India and Pakistan and around the world. Mental health in the UK, the services are collapsing. They're not that good. And yet we're trying to export that to low and middle income countries. So do beware of that. And, you know, I do have a problem with much more of this colonization of psychiatry, in which, you know, the global north is trying to tell, you know, the global south what they should be doing. Be proud of the sovereignty. Be proud of what you're doing. I always think that we need to be careful we don't pathologize the poor when we speak to people, when we're dealing with psychiatry, when we're dealing with global mental health. And this is one of the areas we're acutely aware of. There's a danger of focused attention on global mental only serves to divert attention from more difficult social and humanitarian problems, as I describe, or the political environment. People might just be responding to the situation they're in. It cannot be pathologized into some sort of psychiatric phenomenon. You cannot reframe problems with the individual mental health and offering treatments who, after all, are expressing the pain of a system. I think sometimes the global mental health movement become unwittingly complicit and corrupt and support human rights abuses. The bar is low, so we've got to be careful with that. Much more is in the stuff we're following. The World Psychiatric Association is the pivotal organization with ASA, because the people who are represented with the WPA are the people from these countries that I've described. They are experiencing the red effect, the orange effect. Let's engage with them and help those. There's a number of papers we have published: Geopolitical Factors in Mental Health, Foreign Aid, the Cape Vulnerability Index. We will be publishing the second edition of the Cape Vulnerability Index later this year. In our textbook, Oxford textbook, Geopolitics and Migrants and Refugees, Refugee Mental Health in the Cambridge University textbook, Understanding Geopolitical Determinants of Health, that's a WHO publication we've done. Magna Carta of Individuals Living with Mental Illness, Public Policy Mental Health, Public Health Approach to Violence. We've done a special edition Cape Vulnerability Index for Latin America and the Caribbean. And if you think we need to do a Cape Vulnerability Index for Asia, I'm putting the call out to you now. Contact me, let's do it. Do a specific vulnerability index, looking at the 9 indicators for Asia, for Pakistan. So you have the most up-to-date, sturdy evidence that you can use for research, for funding, for services, for training, for everything. Publish a paper on COVID-19 and violence against girls, the shadow pandemic that's emerging. We have a commission to produce a textbook on the principle of geopsychiatry, so things are moving. That will be published, and we'll have a special edition, Geopsychiatry Journal, fairly out by the end of this year. So geopsychiatry is becoming a movement in the UK, in Asia, in Latin America, and everywhere. Because people can identify what we're saying. We don't own it. The world of psychiatry owns it. And it should be part of foreign policy. We need to shift the dial and put psychiatry at the heart, the forefront of the global movement at the moment. I want to end there because I think this is psychiatry at the moment. It's like a traffic light that's showing different colors and moving in different directions. Really, this is what's happening in the world. But there's some green, there's some oranges, and some amber, and there's some red. We need to create more green. And I hope this presentation has created a way of thinking that we can create more green and more people get involved. Indeed, our dean here in the UK and elsewhere, we're looking to see how we can introduce geopsychiatry slowly into the curriculum. That will be a good start in undergraduate and the postgraduate training. We're looking to see how we can expand it across many professional groups and how the NGOs can be involved. Who knows, there may come a time where we can develop a PhD program, MSc, and a diploma program. That's what I would like to see. We're currently based in the UK, whether it's myself and Dennis Bugger, the Institute of Psychiatry or Queen Mary's and whatever. Ideally, I would like to house all of this work in the low-income countries and move it out to the high-income countries. So I look forward to hearing from you in Pakistan. Enjoy the conference. I'm going to finish here. But please email me, contact me if you want to get involved with this. We have textbooks coming up. If you want to contribute chapters, let me know. Scope it. And I thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care. Goodbye.